Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Wilson. I'm the executive director of the Inside Out LGBT Film Festival, and we're so thrilled to be presenting this conversation with you today. I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator for this conversation, the amazing Sam Feder. Cited by IndieWire as one of the most exciting trans filmmakers shaking up Hollywood, Sam's films explore legacy, conflict, and futures within the queer and trans communities while setting new standards for the ethics in documentary filmmaking. Sam's films include Kate Bornstein as a Queer and Pleasant Danger, 2014, and the recently released, streaming worldwide, Disclosure, world premiered Sundance 2020, executive produced by Laverne Cox, an unprecedented, eye-opening look at transgender depictions in film and television, revealing how Hollywood simultaneously reflects and manufactures our deepest anxieties about gender. It is my pleasure to welcome our moderator, Sam Feder.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations on your world premiere of No Ordinary Man. I am so happy to be here talking with you. So thank you, Tiff and Inside Out, for bringing us all together. I would love for you all to actually introduce yourselves at first and also say a little bit about how you're feeling right now with the state of the world and being, on this side of your world premiere. Aisling, why don't you start?
I'm Aisling Chin-Yee. I'm a co-writer, the co-director, and the editor of No Ordinary Man. And I mean, the state of the world, it's a complicated place right now. So it's, I think there's a lot of words that could be used, but I think we're in a profound moment, to say the least.
Chase.
Hello, my name is Chase Joynt, and I'm one of the co-directors of No Ordinary Man, and I'm particularly excited to be on this side of our world premiere because it requires us all to get back together again in Zoom room conversations and otherwise, and because it's such an ensemble-based project, it feels right and fitting to be together here.
And Marquise.
Hey, this is Marquise Vilsón, activist first and foremost, who happens to be an actor. The way that I'm feeling today, I'm present. I'll just say that I'm present, I'm here.
Thank you. Amos.
Hello, I'm Amos Mac. I'm the co-writer of No Ordinary Man, and I'm feeling grateful for technology these days. And yeah, happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to be here with all of you. Aisling, it's nice to meet you for the first time. I think we've been in touch a little bit over the years. And Chase, Amos, and Marquise, I love you all, and I'm really glad that we get to see each other for a few minutes. Aisling, can you actually set the stage for how this film came to be? Because I believe you were on this project the longest, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it started at Parabola Films. The producer, Sarah Spring, had kind of the idea of making a project about Billy Tipton. And so then when I kind of came on board, quickly reached out to Amos and to Chase to kind of build this team and this collaboration. And so it kind of started in that sort of creative space with Amos and I kind of trying to conceive of how to tell the story of somebody who wasn't here to tell it themselves, and also that there was no moving images. So what were we going to kind of like pull from? And so with that was like became a bigger team, and then obviously like the three of us just kind of started jamming out.
Can you talk a little bit about specifically your relationship to music? And I think also I'd love to hear about your relationship to, how do you pronounce his last name? Aucoin, the other musician that is featured? Okay.
Rich Aucoin, yeah.
Yeah, talk about your relationship to the music in the film.
Well, this was the one thing that Billy did leave behind for us as a record of his, of who he was and his voice was really his music and his recordings, and we heard his voice in the rehearsals and stuff like that. So music is an important part in the cinematic experience. And so it was a nice groundwork to kind of start from. Just like we can hear his hands on the piano, we can hear his voice when he sings, like so kind of building from that space that this is who we know who he is as a musician was kind of the most comfortable place to start. And then in building like kind of the greater team of the music, Rich O'Coin, who is a musician based in Nova Scotia, where I'm actually originally from. He's like kind of a multidisciplinary artist. He's queer. He's also an amazing pianist. And it was, I had shared the project with him at some point during post-production, was like, hey, is this something that it touched him and it reached him. And so when we shared it with him, it's like, well, maybe you should be, the hands of Billy in this capacity. Maybe you can bring the music and kind of bring the story into a contemporary place in that artistic endeavor.
Was he writing original music, or he was playing Billy's music?
Well, Billy plays his own music in the film, so it's like all of the recordings are the original piano in it is mainly Billy's, and then he was making the music that was like including the synths and the piano, and he was working off of like his like mom's piano in Nova Scotia, but also adding the kind of electro synth elements and the room elements to it, so that it would live in this more contemporary space that the film we think lives in as well. So yeah, like it's definitely a combination of all of his like hard work and also being inspired by Billy as well.
Thank you. I wanted to jump right into the structure and the style of the film because, there was clearly so much intention put into that. And this could have easily been just a fascinating documentary in a very conventional way, right? You could have just done this sort of very straightforward story. But I think the style speaks to so many issues and ideas that we're all sitting with at all times that, you're gesturing towards. And Chase, that is such a theme in all of your work. And so can you talk a little bit about, just kind of bring us into how you came into this project, your thoughts, if this was something you had wanted to do before, but also your structural choices. Specifically, we can start with the audition and why you wanted to include that into the storytelling.
Sure. So this is the first time that I've joined a project that was already in motion. And so there was something brilliant and new to me about stepping into the work that Aisling and Amos had already constructed, working on scenes, thinking about casting. And, my style is sourced from early theater school training, which is prep hard and long. And then when you get on stage, let it all go and see what happens. And I really think about directing and documentary in that same way, which is you have to allow things to unfold through interactions and with people on and off camera. And so maybe one small anecdote to bring Marquise into the fold is that Aisling and I were in New York looking at casting tapes. And just to clarify, we had pulled as many transmasculine tapes from as many places as possible with the call to come and show up as yourself. It was a call for a documentary, not for a fiction film. And we were clicking through casting tapes on an online portal, and Marquise popped up, and we watched this incredibly dynamic tape, and I literally jumped out of my seat and I think said, I love this guy. And in part, it was about the performance, but it was also because as a trans masculine person, I came of age actually seeing Marquise on screen in an early documentary called The Aggressives from 2005. And my geek doc brain was like, this is the meta layer of trans masculine historical content that we need to make this story make sense. And Aisling was like, okay. And so we went for a walk and we came back down. And, it's a great example of my process, which is to say, yes, we knew one thing was going to happen, but only upon seeing Marquise could we imagine the new momentum and new story potential from that place.
He was literally doing cartwheels. Like it's true.
I'd like to see that. Can you do a cartwheel?
Yeah, if this Q&A slumps, I'm just gonna.
I mean, I saw you have your pencil, so you got your academic side. I want to see your athletic side too. Okay, so continuing with the structural questions, Amos, I would love to hear about your writing process. And specifically, I'm curious about what sources you relied on and how you were thinking about creating this voice for Billy. There's moments that felt very intentional and almost overt. Like there's a line like, "I'm the man of the house," right? Like that. As a trans person, I'm like, okay, that was intentional. What's going on? I'm curious about how you created that voice, what your resources were.
Well, first there was like many different aspects of going into writing, like the treatment for this. And it was Billy's biography, what we know from the internet, from Diane Middlebrook's book, which was a huge resource because of the amount of research that she had done, as problematic as it was, giant resource because she had really gone through like all of his relationships and all of, all the men and women in his life. And it really showed the work that she had done. And I was able to, kind of look through it, like read it, but while being very aware that Diane had a very specific thing she was trying to get out of people's interviews about, like her intention was very different from our intention. Yeah. So that was the first aspect, crafting his biography without dead naming him, without, doing the traditional trans tropey trans things from earlier in people's lives. And then there was the idea of creating these, like fictionalizing these moments that did happen in his life, but the scripted elements where we had the casting come in and we had the actors and to have their own take of what Billy's process was at the time. And that was like a very fun part because we knew that there were huge parts in his life, and we just, Aisling and I like settled in and just focused on honestly, what do I think he'd said during this? And I was trying to be as intentional of like what I was putting myself in Billy's shoes, trying to think what he would have said in those moments. And especially the moment of, with Buck, that was a moment that I became quite obsessed with when I realized that Buck was transmasculine himself.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of questions about Buck. Has there been anything written about Buck? Did you find anything about him?
Not much more, other than I feel like we did some research diving on Buck, and we had people researching, beyond just us. And it seems that he kind of faded away, like changed his name, maybe, I don't know if he did some time in jail and then went by different names and then just kind of like fell off. Couldn't find an end result.
Morgan Page. I bet Morgan Page could find out more, if anyone can find out. Okay. Marquise, hi. So nice to see you. Because I know you and seeing you in the film and this other capacity and how I've worked with you and just seeing those tender moments that you bring to everything you do, it was so sweet. And you just bring this openness and vulnerability. And there was this particular moment that I'm sure most people will react to after watching this film where you respond to that rumor line, and everyone on set was sort of taken back. And I think anyone watching would feel that in their gut. And can you kind of talk to us about that moment for you?
That moment for me was really very personal. I think in the way that for myself, I'd actually experienced that. And so to hear that line, like heard a rumor, it really is one of those things that can be that maker or break sort of moment. And in that moment, I was thinking about exactly how he might be responding to that in 1954 and like what would he be thinking? What would he be feeling? How would he, navigate that in a way that doesn't necessarily come off as being alarmed, but still have a sense of awareness and also even being kind of confident, at the same time, because thinking about Billy Tipton's person, I mean, he seemed to be a very large personality, not in, an aggressive kind of way, but in a fearless kind of way, so yeah, that moment was very tricky when I saw the text. I was like, oh shit, is this gonna happen? Like what's going on, so.
And then for those of you behind the scene, what was that like for you in that moment? Like, how did that change your relationship to the script? I guess, Amos, you wrote the line, so maybe you can talk about that.
I swear, when I wrote that line, it was not my intention to have the person saying that to Billy, to have Billy react that way. Like, I didn't even think of the double entendre of that line.
Can you kind of restate what happened in case someone's watching this, like,
yes,
doesn't know what we're talking about?
There's a line in the casting where one of Billy's colleagues, another musician, comes up to him and says, "Heard a rumor." And Billy's response, he responds with like a joke, like, "Oh, what? I forget what the response was, but he kind of like, throws it back in his face, like as a joke. And the rumor is that another musician is coming to check out the club. And Billy was like really excited about it, but that was what the rumor was. But the rumor could have been, I heard a rumor about you, but that was not the intention. But I was blown away because, like, how did I miss that? Or did I know that I'd written that and not, didn't think twice? Or did you write it, Ashley?
It's all the mystery. Yeah. I mean, same thing. Like, it was not. I mean, and you see the shock on our faces. It's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense to interpret it that way, and it gone over all of our heads, So it's so amazing that when somebody does embody the people that you are, that you think you're writing about, and it's like, oh, and then brings a whole other beautiful interpretation to the role or to the perspective, and it's just like that's movie magic, when that happens.
And Marquise, have you seen that scene now since you were in it?
I have. At this point, I've watched it twice. I wanted to really kind of process it. The first time, I was just like, I was so emotional. And the second time, as I heard it and I watched the scene play out again, it was like, this is scary. This is like, for any trans person who is at work, who's at school, and someone says a thing to you like, heard a rumor. If you're someone who's low to no disclosure, stealth, right? Like, yeah, that's definitely a scary moment.
And Marquise, can you share a little bit more about being part of this project? And was this something you had thought about wanting to be part of in the past? Had you always wondered if there was a film like this out there?
I've always wanted to see our ancestors talked about in story. And especially in terms of like visual aid, right? Like film. Billy Tipton in particular just always seemed like a really cool person, obviously, to document and kind of like re-examine. I had no idea that this would take place. And I must admit, I was honored, quite honestly. I remember looking up information on Billy Tipton as a young person. So for me, it's like, it's this really weird sort of ode being paid to him in this way, like somebody who I looked up to, someone who is an icon, someone who's a pioneer, who completely paved the way for the way that we show up today now. It's crazy to even think about that I would be sitting in the same realm of like having this conversation and adding contextually to his history. And it's so cool.
Thank you. I have two more questions that I want to hit on, and I know we're going over time, so Tiff, you can decide whether to include this or not. But Chase, I want to go back to some of the stylistic choices. Why, if you could talk about ensemble versus singular star, right? I mean, we're seeing all these auditions. We never know where these auditions are going. Where are they going to go for a scripted piece? Was this always the intention? And then also including yourself, right? We see Amos in the formal interviews, but you're included in this very casual way. We hear you off camera a lot, and then we see you in conversation. So I know I've just asked you like 700 questions at once. So whatever part of that resonates with you the most, I'd love to hear you speak to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think listening to this conversation too, I'm continually reminded that our project is really about the politics of recognition, right? And all of the ways in which between Buck and Billy, we have moments of perhaps recognition or kinship at a time that might have been unspoken, or the moment between me and Marquise, even while Marquise not knowing it as I'm watching the casting tape, or the moment between Alex and Amos on screen where Alex realizes he has an aha about his own coming of age as a trans person through work that Amos was doing in public, even down to the fact that, Sam, you're here with us in conversation as a trans culture maker. And there's just like all of the different ways that we find each other through making stories and trying to find histories. And I think that, you know, Ash and I have had ongoing conversations about authorship, the visibility of who makes stories, who does the speaking, who becomes the active agent, who takes it back, like, and always shifting and having those positions never really be stable in any project. I think that my presence in the film or behind the camera comes out of, again, a different kind of politics of recognition, which is to say, in dialogue with Billy Jr., there was a moment where I felt like I needed to meet him, recognize him in his vulnerability by walking toward him. So as he is sharing with us and opening up his home and his world and his history about his relationship with his dad, how could I say, well, this is who I am, and this is why it matters that we as a team are here. And I hope that this is a way that we can trust each other in telling this story in a new way.
Yeah, I really wanted to see more about his reaction to you, which was just like, you know, voyeuristic exploitation. So I'm glad it wasn't in there, but that was a moment that I felt that, and I'm really glad you kept that in. That was really beautiful. Then this last question is really to all of you, and so whoever kind of wants to us talk to it first, because it really includes all of you. So I want to talk about the role of that race plays in the film. You know, there's one, you know, Marquise is the only Black actor auditioning for this white role. From everyone else is seemingly white passing. And there is a moment where there's a conversation about that. And I also noticed that it was only in the scenes with Marquise that the person reading lines was shown, and that was also a Black person. So I was really interested, like, what role did race play in you structuring this story?
Well, I think there's a number of ways to start the conversation. I love the moment when Marquise engages and discloses as an organic part of why one might walk toward a project about Billy Tipton, why one might walk toward a project about a working class, white, masculine historical subject, and that the structure of the documentary itself allows participants to speak for themselves. In building out the cohort of speaking subjects about Tipton, felt really important to us to make sure to be thinking with scholars and activists who are always approaching issues intersectionally. So how thinking about gender is always thinking about race, how thinking about gender and race is always thinking about class, and to never fully separate out any of these, because of course they do not in many ways exist without each other. So how does thinking with someone like Riley Snorton, who wrote an incredibly important book, Black on Both Sides, which is thinking about the relationship between transness and Blackness, how does that allow us to consider Billy Tipton differently?
And I think just to kind of, you know, go off of on Chase's amazing answer is, you know, in the early parts of the project too, we were looking at people that were, you know, Billy's story has been told problematically over the amount of years, but his story keeps being told. But there are other people like Little Axe Broadnax that we wanted to have included in the film, who was a very successful Black transmasculine gospel musician who was also at the same time a gospel singer, and how his story has been left out, you know. And we were also playing with the idea of using the Middlebrook book as one text, but there's also another text called Trumpet that has interpreted Billy's story, but through a African-American trumpet player. So it was always kind of a part of that. And as a person of color myself, like, this seeps into the type of storytelling that I like, that I'm a part of. And in terms of like Marquise and the casting, was that like, we knew from that casting tape, like, while, you know, Chase was doing the cartwheels, that like, where Marquise is going to be he's going to be a center of focus in this movie because of his amazingness. So we were, for his interview or for his audition, like, ready. We were like 2 camera ready. So it was So that was a production choice based on the amazingness that is Marquise. So
I love that the answer is, why do you have a reverse shot? And we're like, because we decided we needed another camera. It's a great
Amos, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
You know, I feel like I learned a lot in the process of this film, and I learned what a process documentary was first, you know, through Chase and Aisling. I learned, you know, I didn't know about Trumpet. I didn't know that Trumpet existed before this. So there are, you know, going into this, thinking that this was a film about Billy Tipton on my end was very, you know, short-sighted of me to not, you know, I just feel like very full with knowledge and information, and like honored that I'm a part of it because of what I've learned along the way and how far this film has gone from the inception of it being about one man.
Yeah. And Marquise, do you have any final thoughts?
Sorry, I'm trying to be polite. There's like construction in the background.
Very good manners.
I'm just really happy that this film will be seen and people will have an opportunity to not just know about the traumas that trans people experience and face, but about them as human beings, about their life, and thinking about Billy Tipton Jr. I really do. I hope and I pray that this is one moment in his life where he actually gets to be proud and not constantly be met with shame. When I think about this story, the story of Billy Tipton, and when it all took place, it's not just about Billy being the first time we're really hearing about a transmasculine person. More than I recognize in that moment in time, it was the first time, actually, now that I can think of, that I saw allyship in the way of loved ones standing in alignment with the person who wasn't even physically there. And I hope and I pray that people will come away knowing that allyship more often than not looks like being a co-conspirator. It's the thing that you do when no one is looking, when no one is around. And that kind of, even today in this moment in time, that kind of unconditional love that Billy Tipton Jr. still has, it's amazing. He is the perfect example of what it means to be a human being, to be a loving human being. I could go on and on and on, but it's just amazing. The film is amazing. And the intention behind it and what people can come away with. Finally seeing someone talked about in a way that is full and not just trauma, you know, not just salacious. So.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that really resonates across the film in that way. What you're saying is, you know, of Billy Jr. so clearly confused, right, and not at peace with a lot of it, but his love is consistent, and that never sways, and that's what everyone wants for the people in their lives, like trans, non-trans, and that doesn't matter. That's what we all want. We want that consistency of love, while people may not understand us. Like, you don't have to understand me to love me, right? And so that's such a beautiful lesson of the film. So thank you all. Thank you for all the work, you know, the years and years and the hours and hours and the tears and the stress that it takes to make a project. Congratulations. It's such an incredible film. I can't wait to see how the world responds to it. And thanks again to Tiff and Inside Out for bringing us all together.
Thanks, you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.